This is The Law Show on CL 650. Now back to the show.
Yeah, you're listening to The Law Show on CL 650. Today we're speaking with family lawyer David Halkett and Sarah Morse, both at McQuarrieHunter in Surrey. Now, before the break, we talked about a lot of different things, but I referred to the fact that we are living in a uber expensive city, and the greater Vancouver area. It's become very, very expensive. And you have families that come and they maybe have 2 kids, and they live in a house or an apartment or what have you, and they don't want to continue their relationship. But what the heck do you do? Like, where do you go? How does it work? I'm sure, obviously, there's probably an onus. We always hear that the mother would stay in the house with the kids and the father would move out. Like, how does that work? And what's your advice to people?
Well, on the one hand, I tell the clients, don't move out of the home. Not because it hurts you legally, but leverage-wise. If you're out of the home, the one in the home is less likely to want to sell it.
Right.
A lot of people now, especially in the last 10 years, probably as a result of cost, are separating but remaining in the same home. When I first started practicing in the 90s, when you separated, either wife or husband moved out, and that was it. Now they're staying in the same home, maybe separate rooms, or instead of getting the rent from the basement suite, dad usually is the one that moves downstairs. That tends to happen a lot more. If it's not practical, you can go to court and get an order for exclusive occupancy. And usually when there's children, they stay in the home, and whoever the primary caregiver is, for lack of a better term, will stay there with them. Is
it typically, if we've got both parents working the same amount of hours, how does that decided? Because often, we always think that it's going to be the mom, but is it still trending towards the mom, or is it kind of 50-50 now?
Depends on the age of the children.
Is that right?
If the child is under 1, chances are it's going to be primarily with the mom. Yeah. 1 to 5, a bit more with the dad. After 5, they can be a bit more even.
Yeah, I would say under 5, in some of the cases I've done, it ends up being a graduated schedule. There's definitely, what I've seen in court is the judiciary is very much geared towards, if mom and dad both want equal time with the child or children, unless there's any kind of safety concerns or anything along those lines, they agree. They say, yep, mom and dad, both loving parents, they should have a right to see the kids as much as they each can. But when you're dealing with an infant child, obviously that's not always possible. But then they'll do a graduated schedule, so it's going up.
Can you give me an example of a family that's the relationship's come to an end, and how long will they live in the same house before this is resolved? Well,
the court system tries to get family law matters through as quickly as they can. We'll deal with the Supreme Court because that's where you'd be dividing the asset. If they don't own the house, they probably will just move separate or apart, and we'll deal with the provincial. But if you start an action, you got to serve the other side. They have 30 days to respond. Then you have to set a judicial case conference, which can be a couple of months down the road, and that's mandatory. It's like mediation session in court. And then afterwards, you may be setting a trial 8 months down the road. So you could theoretically be living in the same home for a year and a half, which at the beginning it sounds like a great idea, but as it gets longer and you're in a litigation fight, it tends to get a little stressful in the home.
I bet.
For sure.
Do you have any examples?
Yeah, I would say that exactly. It doesn't tend to last long. It sounds like a good idea at the time, especially when you're facing the thought of one person taking over the mortgage and having to buy the other person out, dealing with 2 sets of hydro bills and 2 sets of kids' clothing and things like that. It does sound economically like a good idea, but as David just mentioned, the emotional aspect of that will definitely start to take its toll very quickly, and it's likely not going to last very long.
Yeah. Now, before the break, we talked about you bring a list of assets, right? And one that is very important is the cost of the children. And I'm sure you get discrepancies in what the actual costs are per month for the children. Maybe the one person says it's $3,000 a month, the other person says it's $500 a month. So how do you get to a common ground, or do you?
Well, it's difficult. We know that our child support's based solely on these guidelines for the most part. So if one person has the child more than 60% of the time, they get the full rate, whatever the other one's income is. We don't really look at expenses for the child except for what they call extraordinary expenses. That could be daycare costs or extracurriculars or private school costs. They're usually pretty standard. The big fights are whether or not the child should be in hockey or soccer, or if they're in 3 or 4 different sports, how many should it be, etc. Daycare is pretty straightforward, as is any private school costs.
All right. Now, you have the assets, you're going through the process, and you have, the old saying that I have to live the lifestyle to which I was accustomed during the marriage. Is it shifting now to women paying spousal support? Because I see in my neighborhood, there's a lot of dads pushing strollers. And, in the law field, there's more and more professional women in law, doctors, architecture. The last holdout is engineering, it seems like. But of the professions, women have moved up. In fact, there's more women going to university for all of these professions than men. So we're starting to see that the women are making more money, and maybe it's better for the dad to stay home. Are you seeing that?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And, And how does the court look at this? Because we all hear these stories that, well, it's discriminatory against dads or men for women. Is that true? Is that nonsense?
No, I don't think it's discriminatory. I think what happens is just historically men earn more money, so they made the payments.
But things have changed. That's
Exactly.
what I'm saying. Yeah.
I still think on the face of it, it's harder for a man to get spousal support than a woman. But the law is supposed to be blind to the sexes, and I think the judges don't look at who's actually applying. I think it tends to be that men don't, even though in your neighborhood there may be more, it still tends to be, in my cases anyway, the men tend to be the ones who make the most
I do
money.
live in a neighborhood with a lot of professionals, so you're starting to see that, right?
Yeah, but there's no reason that a guy couldn't get spousal support if they had the same role in a relationship that the stay-at-home mom used to have. He's in the same economic disadvantage, and he would get spousal support in court.
Are you seeing the same thing?
Yeah, I mean, the same rules apply. Whether men pursue it as often as women, though, I mean, I think there still is that aspect of it where, whether it's a knock to sort of the ego or something along those lines.
But if there's a huge discrepancy, obviously you would need that support.
Exactly, there would be. Yeah.
But if it's only moderate, then people maybe don't pursue it as much, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. All right, now, different forms of property ownership here in British Columbia. So you own a house; it's what you call freehold land.
That's right.
So your house is sitting on a lot, then you own the lot. But there's obviously different kinds. There's a condo living. There's you live in a co-op, or I know in some parts there's leasehold land, like a UBC. There's it's native land, right? So how does that work?
Well, the freehold and strata are pretty well the same when it comes to dividing the asset, because even though you're in strata and you only own a portion of the common property, you still own your own unit. So
and you can liquidate it. This is how easy it is to liquidate, right?
Exactly. So the leasehold is a little difficult. I've never had a case where I've been selling a leasehold property. It would be a little bit difficult to actually value it because it's a declining value. The longer the lease, the better, and it depends how much the rent is. So that would be a little bit different. You would actually only be, in effect, dividing the equity of what's left on the lease, and the property value tends to be lower simply because you don't own it.
But they can be liquidated too.
Oh yeah, you would just sell the property. It's just you're selling to someone and selling what's left of the lease. You may get less money. The co-op, basically the same, whatever the equity is. So when it comes to an asset, as long as you have an ownership and you can actually transfer it, it's not like a car lease where you really can't transfer it to someone else.
Right.
As long as you have the ability to transfer whatever the equity or liquidate it, the court will handle it the same way.
Okay. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about different sort of attitudes. One person wants to keep the house and the other wants to sell the house and divide the assets. So that must happen a lot.
It does.
Especially when there's kids involved and it's the family home and all that kind of stuff. So we'll get into that when we come back. We are talking about family law. We have David Halkett, partner at McQuarrieHunter in Surrey, and Sarah Morse, an associate at McQuarrieHunter in downtown Surrey. We'll pick it up next right here on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.